Hey everybody, it's Justin Spears, one half of the tandem of Martison and Spears present The Other Side of. As you know, this is a series that is intended to look at the other side of topics presented in government, history, and economics. And today in U.S. government, we are going to be taking a look at the Articles of Confederation. And so for you as an educator, you are obviously presented with material through your textbook that pushes a narrative, and that in that narrative there is going to be bias. And we know that. That's nothing new. But what we want to do as educators is take a look at this presentation of various different topics, events, and look at the other side of it. Present our students with another alternative of how to think about these issues. And so today, what we're going to be taking a look at is the Articles of Confederation. And I chose this for our opening lecture here, or our opening topic, because it is commonly thought of and seen as the first guiding document for the newly formed country after our independence is won from Great Britain. And so if you take a look at your standard run-of-the-mill textbook today, you're going to get a presentation on the Articles of Confederation that is in summation going to be somewhere along the lines of, it was the first guiding document. It was essentially ratified through the Continental Congress because the country needed a guiding document. They didn't want to create something with a strong central government because they had just rebelled from something like that. So they created a document that made a weak central government, a lot of state sovereignty, a lot of states' rights, and that was a bad thing. That was a bad thing, that the states had so much power and so much sovereignty, because it was that power of 13 individual states that nearly wrecked the new nation. And so that's essentially, in a nutshell, what you're going to get. And just to kind of back that up with some support from what I see in my textbook as I reviewed through the Articles of Confederation, we see just from the very beginning that this is presented as a simple structured document, right? Now you might think, well, what's wrong with that? Well, when you overall take the narrative that is pushed through this textbook, what you'll find is the author and the editors, they're very big into pushing a narrative of big government as a solution. Right, that a lot of what we see, whether it's through a historical lens or through a construction of the government lens, that more government is always better. And so to clarify this, when we look at this section on a simple structure, yes, it is a statement of fact, but I also think there's a little bit of a dig in there, going back to the notion that this document was just not sophisticated enough to be able to handle the issues that faced a new country after the war was over. And so it immediately kind of gives a look at some of the negative, the bad, the weaknesses that surface with this. Now, to their credit, they do give a very, very small section in here to the powers granted to Congress. But here is where we really kind of see the bias set in. There is a listing of powers in here given to the newly created national government, but it's just simply a list. There's nothing in here to get the reader, i.e. the student, to think about, well, was that enough? Or why was that not enough, right? It's just the narrative is it wasn't enough. There's no questioning about this. So, when you read through the power that Congress had to make war, send and receive ambassadors, make treaties, borrow money, set up a money system, establish post offices, build a navy, so on and so forth, there's never any question about why wasn't that enough. That seems like a lot of power to be given to a government. Could that not have been sufficient to getting things accomplished? But no, we immediately jump into the weaknesses. And really the biggest weakness that is obviously always pointed out when looking at the Articles of Confederation is the lack of taxation power by the new Congress. And again, when you think about people who are in favor of big government, right, that's one of the first things that you look at is, the power to tax is something that, you use the government to create all of these different programs, and those are paid through tax dollars. So that's really the biggest pull here as a weakness. Now, the author does talk about how it was hard to get things done through the Articles of Confederation, that you needed 9 of the 13 states to pass a law, all 13 to amend the document. And so, there was some presentation of it being negative in that way. But again, why isn't that that looked at from the other side of, well, maybe that was a positive thing. Maybe that kept sectionalism from taking over in the Congress and things of that nature. And so there is a much larger section then devoted to a time of troubles, the 1780s, or what is often referred to as the critical era or the critical period. And again, in this section, the presentation is, look, you've got this new nation, and it is about ready to crumble at the indifference of the states. That essentially the trade embargoes, the taxation policies on British goods, and things of that nature were really crippling the economy. And the mercantile Northeast and the agrarian society of the South both were being crushed by this. In addition to the economy failing, you had soldiers that weren't being paid. You had insurrection everywhere with Shays' Rebellion, and the central government couldn't appropriately handle that. And so there's just kind of this doom and gloom presentation here before then jumping into the call for a convention to amend the Articles of Confederation, which, as you know, then turns into the Constitutional Convention. And again, our government book doesn't even mention the Annapolis Convention, does not mention Hamilton or Madison or Washington as Federalists yet, although I think they will get to that at some point here. But they leave that and omit that out as a way of maybe hiding some of the intent, as we know Madison had with the Virginia plan, in getting a stronger national government presented here. So again, what you'll find in this lesson plan here that we've presented to you along with this video is a number of articles that you can read through that give a historical, not just an opinion, but historians' view on a more favorable look at the Articles of Confederation. I've linked to 2 articles from Mises Institute from historians that have written a more positive outlook on the Articles of Confederation, that look at it from a more positive perspective, to say, hey, wait a second, the economy had actually started to turn around and pull through, and that, you know, the insurrection of things like Shays' Rebellion and Whiskey Rebellion could have been handled by the state governments, and that, you know, look, the Articles of Confederation guided us through the Treaty of Paris. It guided us through the purchase of the Northwest Territory. There was a lot of good that was going on here. Now, again, when you present this narrative, I'm not necessarily saying you or your students have to agree with it, but at least present it to think about. And so along with that, I've presented some discussion questions and a follow-up assignment that you can give with this lesson plan. So I hope you find this beneficial, and I hope that you find this presents the other side of the Articles of Confederation.